Good afternoon, everyone. Congressional Districts 14 and Congressional District 16. My name is Brandon Lloyd, and I am a congressional aide for Congressman Jamaal Bowman. Thank you very much for joining us for this town hall this evening. If you're logged into the Zoom meeting, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. Please mention what neighborhood or city you're from as we prioritize questions from constituents. Alternatively, you can email questions to aoc.townhall@mail.house.gov/bowmantownhall@mail.house.gov or call 718-662-5970 or alternatively 718-530-7710. Our staff is also available to support with any technical difficulties. In addition, our team members will also be monitoring the inbox and phone. We're also live from Congressman Ocasio-Cortez's YouTube channel, so please feel free to visit our YouTube page for the live stream. CART open captions is also being provided by All Hands in Motion. If you click the link in the chat, it will also take you to our website where you can read the transcription. For today's town hall, we will hear from Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and Congressman Bowman on public health approaches to community safety. We will then open it up to Q&A from constituents. After the Q&A, there will be a press gaggle where members of the press will be able to pose questions. And now it is my pleasure, and I'd like to introduce the representative from New York's 14th Congressional District, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to provide an update on passports and child tax credits.
Of course. Thank you so much, Brandon, for that introduction. And we so appreciate you opening it up and emceeing us today. I also want to say thank you to all of our interpreters that we have. Again, if you're joining via Zoom, just click that interpretation button. Haga clic en el botón de interpretación abajo, and just select Spanish or whichever language that you'd like. We have a really special town hall today in that it is being live translated in about 4 different languages, I believe, today. So we have Chinese, Spanish, Nepali, and Bangla live translation today. I think that is a personal record for our town halls this evening. So we're really excited and very thankful to our interpreters this evening that are helping us reach more and more members of our community every month. So thank you again. And let's kick it off. As Brandon mentioned, one of the first things that I just wanted to speak about before we really dig into the meat of this month's town hall and about really public safety, just wanted to get a few things out of the way first. The first one is passports. As we are all getting more vaccinated every day, and as we're all just doing an incredible job, New York City and New York State, we are slowly but surely really elevating our vaccination levels. And with summer here, with us celebrating the start of summer, we are seeing a lot of folks that want to travel, and we're really excited about that. I know a lot of people want to go and see family abroad or just travel abroad, and we want you to be able to do that. And in order to do that, I want to make sure that each of you check your passport for its expiration date. And the reason that we are being so urgent about this is because the passport queue has gotten quite long. It can take up to 4 months to renew your passport. And so we don't want you to plan an incredible trip and to check off all the boxes, book your ticket, do everything you need to do, and then have forgotten to check your expiration on your passport and you not be able to get it renewed in time to fulfill all of your travel dreams this year. So please make sure that you check your passport. Even if you're not planning to go anywhere, if you believe that if you see that your passport may be expiring soon, or if you just want to apply for one in general, just my recommendation is to file it get it out of the way, and just have it just in case. Now, one of the things that we can say is that there is a very narrow set of circumstances. If your passport has expired and you do need to travel, there is a narrow set of circumstances where our offices, my and Representative Bowman's office, are able to intervene. But again, it's a very narrow set of circumstances. It's essentially life or death situations. If you have a close loved one abroad that is in a severe medical emergency, there are instances where you can call on our offices and we can help expedite a passport renewal. But again, the ability to do that and the bar to do that is very, very high. So just make sure that you submit your passport for renewal right away. One of the things that we're seeing in both of our offices, and I think in a lot of congressional offices, is a lot of phone calls of people scrambling on their passports. And over the last year of COVID, we didn't really pull them out of our drawers very often. And so that means that a lot of us may have missed that your passport has expired. So just if you've got 2 minutes today, just jot it down on a Post-it note or walk over to your desk drawer, wherever you keep your passport, and pull it out and check the expiration date and just send it off for renewal if it is expiring soon. So all of that said, again, take a look at our travel advisories at travel.state.gov before traveling as well, because not all countries are dealing with the COVID pandemic in equal or equitable ways. So make sure that you double check your travel plans and refile your passport. Next up, let's just talk a little bit about the child tax credit, which we are extremely excited about. Back in January, Representative Bowman, myself, and just the overall Democratic caucus, we really put in one of the most ambitious child tax credit policies in recent history. And it was signed back in January with the American Rescue Plan. And essentially, as some folks in our caucus call it, is that it's Social Security for kids this year during the pandemic. And so or rather, in the after the pandemic. And so what this means is that if you are a couple that makes less than 150K, or if you're a head of household making less than 112, single parents, et cetera, or if you make less than $75,000 each, you will be starting to receive checks if you have children. And the full credit, it will be given out. There'll be monthly checks between now and the end of the year. That full amount is going to add up to $3,600 for each child under 6, or $3,000 for each child under 18 but above 6. And so what that means is that many of you may start to be receiving monthly checks that amount to about $300 per child that you have. This is a really enormous stride forward in terms of tackling poverty in our community. But again, half the credit will be sent in monthly checks from July to December in 2021, and you'll start receiving them in about 2 to 3 weeks on July 15th. And then you can claim the other half of that credit on your 2021 taxes. So we are really, really excited about this. And for context, in our community, one of the things that we are starting to see in the impact of the child tax credit is that about 90% of children in New York 14, about 90% of children in our district alone are going to benefit from the improved child tax credit. The average benefit for about 44,000 households, not even individuals, but households in our district is about $2,800. And this is going, again, in our community alone, in our pocket of the Bronx and Queens alone, it's going to lift about 12,000 children out of poverty in our congressional district alone. And so there's going to be thousands more that are going to be impacted in Representative Bowman's district, and millions of children across the United States are going to be lifted out of poverty thanks to the child tax credit. And so our focus is going to be to try to extend the child tax credit and see if this is something that we can get for families in need on a longer basis. But from now until December, you can keep an eye out for that, and it should be helping a lot of families in our community. Now we can move on to, I believe, the next slide that we have, and we're going to start moving on to the larger part of our town hall. So I think we've got Representative Bowman. He may have some issues. Let me see. Does Representative Bowman, are we able to turn on your video? Let's see. Okay, we got you. We got you. All right.
Yes, we have me. How you doing, Alex? Good to see
I'm
you.
well. Good to see you,
Congresswoman
Jamaal.
Ocasio-Cortez. How's everything?
No, it's all right.
Good to hang out with you. Hello, everyone out there. Thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us and learn about all of the stuff we're working on together. Really appreciate you tuning in. Please make comments and drop questions in the chat. Thank you, Alex, for sharing that information about passports and the child tax credit. You are right, that is huge. We have just cut child poverty in half by 50%. But that is just through this year. We are now trying to push the administration to make it permanent. And thankfully, the White House is working on that. Leadership is working on that. But we have to stay vigilant to make the child tax credit permanent. I'm now going to transition to talk about community safety models. These are amazing violence prevention programs that are happening in our districts. And the goal here is to stop violence before it starts and to be as proactive and preventative as possible. Many times we know the communities that are most in need, and we know the young people that need the supports the most, but we haven't historically done a good enough job in really investing in those programs and really centering those programs at the top of the agenda. So Stand Up to Violence is one of those programs. It's a program that works out of Jacoby Hospital, and it borders Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's district and my own. We did an amazing event there a couple of weeks ago. And these are just outreach workers that work in the community to reduce retaliation and violence. And as we've seen, the program participants are 52% less likely to be re-injured after a violent incident occurs. And it's very important because these are people from the community. They are credible messengers because many of them have gone through some tough circumstances in their lives. And now they're trying to do everything in their power to make sure the cycle of violence isn't perpetuated with the new generation and generations to come. The BRAG program is another that is a violence prevention program. It operates both out of Mount Vernon and I think it's more in my district in the Bronx, located on 233rd Street. As you can see, they identify and support at-risk youth, mobilize community members to raise awareness about violence and its larger impact. Again, this is about going to the root of the problem, connecting with our young people, building relationships. We know where they are, we know who they are, and we just want to do a good job of being proactive and preventative. The Cahoots program is a model, not in our district yet, working out of Eugene, Oregon, focusing on the mental health of first responders, which is really important. In 2019, out of 24,000 calls, only 311 required police backup. And this is huge because, you know, we often ask our police officers to do too much. Police are trained to respond to violent crime, not often trained to respond to mental health crises or domestic crises. And as a result, they go into that situation with the training that they have, and things escalate quickly, and someone often, unfortunately, loses their lives when it could have been prevented if we had a mental health response. When I worked in education, I worked in schools for 20 years prior to coming to Congress, and we had something called a mobile crisis team to help schools deal with mental health challenges that they weren't equipped to deal with. They were great at de-escalation, and they were great at finding additional supports for children who struggled. And finally, I want to highlight the MASK program, Mothers Against Senseless Killings. What we've seen, not just in Chicago, but throughout the country, even here in New York, is the moms of children who have been killed by senseless violence really coming together in solidarity and in collective healing and in love to push back against gun violence, against senseless violence in their communities, and against the continued proliferation of guns in all of our communities. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, myself, and the Democratic delegation, not just in New York State, but the entire caucus, have pushed and passed common sense gun control laws in the House this session. It still hasn't passed the Senate, which is unfortunate, but it's something we're really working hard to focus on in Congress. And even here, myself and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez are working with local officials to figure out how to stop the flow of guns into our communities in the first place. 70% over 70%, I believe, of the gun incidents that take place in our communities do not come from New York State. They are trafficked into our communities and into our state. So that's something we have to deal with as well.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons that it's so important that we talk about this is that there has been so much discussion when we talk about increases in incidents of violence in New York City. And in fact, Jamaal, can I call you Jamaal? You can call me Alex. Okay. So, when Jamaal and I went to Jacoby Hospital earlier, about last month, to get more resources for the Stand Up to Violence program. One of the things that we really saw is that one of the reasons that I think that we're seeing is that as things start to open up after COVID, we are seeing a huge surge in admissions to the hospital due to mental health crises and mental health issues, particularly with youth, due to, in no small part to the extended amount of isolation that so many of us, but especially our young people, experienced last year, and increases in incidents of violence. Just this morning or last night, there was reporting of an incident right here in Zuriga of a shooting. And one of the things that we see with the Stand Up to Violence program and with programs like the Stand Up to Violence program is that when we actually dig into the details of these incidents, a lot of this increase is happening due to folks who are involved who are young people. And I think it's really important that we talk about that, because if we don't really discuss what the actual qualitative drivers are in these increases in violence, we're never going to be able to solve them. And so if we only think that the only response or the only solution to this is increased policing, but the causes of this are mental health related, then what solely increasing policing does just means that more police will show up after an incident already happens. We have to make sure that we address the actual root causes of violent incidents. And people may say, oh, this is fluffy policy, hard on your sleeve, this, that, and the other. And when Jamaal and I talk about, hey, we need to end the school to prison pipeline, hey, we need to make sure that we have mental health crisis responders, et cetera, people think, oh, well, how is that going to help us now, right? There's this idea that this is going to take 10 years to do. Well, what we've seen with folks in our community who've said, listen, just give us a few folks to work with. Just give us a small population to work with so that we can prove a case study here. What we've seen is that we have been able to, in taking a mental health response, in taking a community-based intervention response, we've been able to drop incidents, reoccurrence of violence by more than 50%. That didn't take 10 years. It didn't take 12 years. Making the right investments helped us drop the reoccurrence of incidents precipitously and very quickly. And so one of the reasons that I think we wanted to have this conversation is to really ask our community to say, let's actually talk about public safety. And I want us all to challenge ourselves into really entertaining solutions that we've seen do work, but it does challenge kind of this traditional way of thinking of every time you see an increase in crime, it means we need to have an increase in our police budget. Not only is that relationship actually not that related, there are cities, and our city included, have increased policing budgets to levels that we've never seen. And that still has coincided at times with increases in crime. So it doesn't mean that there's any causality in between these two things. It means that there are other factors that are driving increases in violence. And if we want to decrease violence and keep our communities safer, we have to stop ignoring those issues and actually investing in the strategies that we have seen clinically with clinical evidence that works. So Jamaal, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to kind of
add
on to
no. I think you explained it very well. And people need to understand our goal is like 0 killings in our community. That's the goal. And the only way to get to that goal is to deal with the root cause of the problem. The New York City police budget is already $11 billion. They have not been defunded. They are still in place right now, but we still see an uptick in violence because of the trauma of the last year. I mean, we've lost over 600,000 American lives in 1 year. We lost the same amount in 4 years during the Civil War. That is what our kids are dealing with. That is what people are dealing with. And you talk about isolation. That is what we all have been dealing with over the last year. So it's trauma, it's depression, it's mental health challenges. It's the constant reminder of all the people who have died. Many of the perpetrators may have lost family members as well. But because we're not taking a holistic mental health approach, we don't have a really good understanding of really what's happening with our kids. And when you mention it's happening with young people, you're exactly right. I mean, we're talking 17 and under in many cases are the people who are perpetuating some of the violence, a lot of the violence that's happening in our community. And in my district, in Mount Vernon, there was another murder last night. And it's going to be consistent if we don't deal with the root cause. And I want to add, if we don't take an interagency and interconnected approach. We were at Jacoby Hospital when we introduced the appropriations project that you and I are working on together, trying to bring an additional $400,000 to support the Stand Up to Violence program. So that's a hospital working with a community-based organization. We have to get our schools involved in that as well, because in many cases, schools are the initial catch-all to identify a child or a family that may be struggling. So the more we understand, the more we get to the root cause, and the more we can be proactive. And these programs, they're operating on shoestring budgets many times, or some of them are just volunteering to stop the violence in their community. So that's what we want to uplift. We want police to do the job that they were sent there to do. And many times it's more reactive than proactive. We are trying to be proactive with the programs that we are uplifting and supporting tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to communicate on top of that, the specificity of what actually happens, right? When we get these investments and we find that a community intervention approach actually drops reoccurrence of violence by more than 50%, what does that mean? Like, what are we actually doing to drop that crime? Here are some of the things that we do. And it might sound, counterintuitive for some people, but the thing is that it works. And we got to run with what works. So some of the first things that we do when there is an incidence of a shooting or a stabbing, invariably or many times, that sends someone to the hospital. And in our case, with what Jacoby's done, is that when someone gets admitted at Jacoby with a gunshot wound, with a stab wound, or with any other incidents of violence, they get flagged in the Stand Up to Violence program. And we say, okay, this person just experienced violence. Now, when people say, oh, what about victims of crime, right? Or what about victims of violence? Well, the thing is that when you are a victim of violence, especially if you're a young man or if you're 17 or, a teenager and you've had this violence happen to you, one of the things that we do and what that Jacoby does is that they bring in psychiatrists in addition to the emergency in addition to the ER doctors. They'll bring a psychiatrist, they'll bring a social worker. And one of the most important aspects of mental first response and social first response is to lower the desire for retaliation, because violence happens in cycles. It launches these cycles. And so then this 1% turns to 3%, turns to 10%. And it increases and increases because you have experienced a traumatizing incident. And sometimes that trauma can really turn into depression, or it can turn into a desire to retaliate. Not only that, but they actually dig into what precipitated the violent incidents. Does this kid have a home? Do their parents have employment? What is the material situation? And is there any instability that is surrounding the situation that might have set this person off on a trajectory? And lastly, what Jacoby has done and in the Stand Up to Violence program is that they recruit people who formerly may have committed violence in their past lives and turn their own lives around to mentor young people that are getting involved in that are kind of getting sucked in to some of these violent cycles. And there is no person better qualified to take a gun out of a kid's hand and out of a teenager's hand than someone who's been there and turned their own lives around. It is so powerful. And a lot of times, investments in our justice system they're almost used as masks. What they are is that they mask this idea of justice as revenge, right? That there's crime and there's punishment, but there's also trauma and there's healing. And the thing is, this is when we talk about, these are some of these areas where we have to challenge our paradigms in what creates safety, because there is this, desire, and you could totally stand up and say, why should we ever reward a person, who had done a bad thing in the past? Why would we ever engage that person again? Well, they know the psychological and personal process of picking up your life and turning it around and making it into something better. And we see this all the time with some of the folks in the Stand Up to Violence program. They are some of the most effective people in the country at turning kids' lives around, because you have something happen to you when you're 17, or you do something impulsively at 17. And then if our response is to just take that kid and throw them into a carceral cycle for the rest of their lives, all we're signing up for is for a cycle of violence to continue in and out, in and out, in and out. And so particularly, it's really important for us to talk about the age where this violence is happening right now, because it's actually a window of opportunity for us to get people back on track. And that's why it's really important that we make these investments.
100%. I would just add, if we can drop something in the chat about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, this is really important, because when our children go through adverse experiences, toxic stress and chronic trauma in the home, in the community, in our schools, it literally impacts the chemistry of their brains.
Yes.
Especially, because they're young and their brains are still developing. When they're going through toxic stress and chronic trauma, it impacts that and leads to some horrible decisions and some horrible outcomes if they are put in particularly tough situations. And that's why what you mentioned, Alex, about the healing piece is so critical, because the healing, the nurturing environment, the mentorship can really help kids to grow from that trauma and get them back on track. Another point we need to make, again, I always want to bring in the academic piece. A lot of those who commit harm against the community really struggle in school because of things like dyslexia that has gone, undiagnosed, some learning challenges that are undiagnosed. They're often given IEPs, put in special ed, and discarded. And then they end up on the corners, end up in gangs to find community and family. And then they get caught up in something and they commit harm. But that mistake, committing that harm, should not discard them or marginalize them for the rest of their lives. There is healing for the victim and also the perpetrator and for the families involved. Because we're talking about communities that have been historically under-resourced, underserved, and marginalized communities where you're going to have food insecurity, you're going to have housing insecurity, you're going to have all these things. So what we're talking about is improving the overall quality of life of individuals, families, and community. And that's how we get to a point where in a short period of time, you're going to see a dramatic decrease in incidents, and I believe zero shootings and killings if we do it the right way.
Excellent. Thank you for those remarks, Congresswoman and Congressman. You both had pressed on some significant and key issues. So now we will move to the Q&A portion of our town hall. As mentioned earlier, constituents signed on to the Zoom platform may use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. Just as a reminder, please remember to mention what neighborhood or city you're from, as we prioritize questions from constituents. In addition, for those that have questions in other languages, you may feel free to do that as well. Also, as a reminder to the members of the press, after the Q&A, there will be a short gaggle where we will be engaging questions from the press as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start with our first few questions, if you two are ready. Excellent. Perfect. So we've received a question from about stop and frisk from Anthony in Astoria and Roland in Jackson Heights. Here's Anthony's question. I'm a Hispanic male who grew up in New York my entire life. I grew up with stop and frisk, and I've been searched for various reasons, which include matching a description, suspicious behavior, etc. And I cannot stress how scared I am it could come back. I wanted to know what your thoughts are on it and how you plan to address it, heaven forbid it comes back.
Jamaal, did you want to?
No, you could. They're from your hood. They're from your.
Okay.
District.
Oh yeah. Okay. Oh, for sure. Sorry about that. Yeah. I think there's no understating the amount of trauma that stop and frisk really instilled in our communities. I will never, ever forget when I worked in restaurants and when I was waitressing. I'd get on the train at Parkchester and I take the train down to Union Square, which is where the restaurant that I worked at was. Every once in a while, sometimes I'd stop at Hunts Point where my cousins lived, spent some time with my nieces, etc. And I'll never forget this one day where I was walking onto the subway station and there were undercover police that had a couple of young men in our community pressed up against a wall and it was a stop and frisk stop. And one of them had a very small amount of marijuana in his pocket. And I'll never forget this day, because we saw this going on, and everyone in our community, at the time, like, no one knew what to do. And it was a lot for such a small thing at the time. And so we get on the train, swipe on, and I take the train down to go to work, and I go to Union Square, and I get off. And this is a community that's closer to NYU. And there were students from NYU who were smoking weed in the park, and there were police all around, and they were being completely unbothered. And to me, there was nothing in my life that conveyed the disparity that stop and frisk introduced, and instability in our community and discrimination. There were few things that highlighted that for me more than that, where I literally got on at one subway station and one person was doing one thing and was criminalized and searched and taken, and the next at a subway stop just a couple zip codes away that has a different racial makeup, and they were able to lead their lives, do the same exact thing, same laws, different enforcement. And that's what stop and frisk represents. Stop and frisk, as it was executed under the Bloomberg administration, was ruled unconstitutional. And I know that our advocacy groups will not let this come back without a fight. And that fight includes me, and that fight includes Representative Bowman. And I know that there is a lot of concern. We are concerned about some of the rhetoric that we've heard about, this flirting with bringing back stop and frisk. And we need to send an unequivocal message that we cannot allow racist and racially targeted policies to return to New York City. And it's all, it was a tool and a tactic in the war on drugs, and we cannot go back. We cannot go back.
Yeah, I was just going to underscore what you just said. We are in the middle of a movement against, police brutality and structural and institutional racism and discrimination. And New York City is, in many ways, ground zero of that movement. There's no way the advocacy groups that are stronger now than they were then are going to allow this to come back. It's just not going to happen. And as you said, yourself, myself, and many others, we're going to be in that fight too. And, I've spoken about this publicly before, as a teacher, as a father, as a grad student, I've been pulled over, handcuffed, placed in police vehicles, car searched, only to be let go. Just straight harassment and abuse for no reason whatsoever, other than I was driving while Black. And we know stop and frisk, I believe, what's the number, 99% of, do not result in arrest. So it's just straight harassment, and it's literally police occupation of Black and brown communities. So the fight is going to be real, and I feel your anxiety and pain around this issue, because even now as a member of Congress, when police roll up on me and they're behind my car, like, I feel anxiety swell up in me. But where the pushback this time around is going to be incredibly strong.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you for those answers, Congresswoman and Congressman. Those were both very powerful. So I'm going to move on to our next question. So we have Penny, and Penny asked, as you address public health and violence prevention, are you also focusing on the need to provide funding for workforce training and job opportunities to individuals with barriers to employment? If so, what measures are being taken to get disenfranchised individuals/communities into the workforce, particularly those who have barriers to employment, example, single parents, teen parents, just involved, illiterate? I know these questions are long-winded, so I can be more than happy to repeat if needed.
No,
Yes. We are doing all of that. That is an excellent question. There's a program, organization in my district called Grayston, and Grayston has an amazing application process where it's an open application. They don't ask anything about your background or history. It goes even further than ban the box. If you are able to sit in the class and receive training and meet other criteria that the job requires, you will absolutely have a job. And it's a great question because I've been working with our local Stand Up to Violence program, which is SNUG in Yonkers and Grayston, to try to literally get kids off of the corner and into Grayston to begin work. Workforce development and working is a really important aspect to this equation because it helps our young people to earn some money, which is great. It helps them to contribute to society, and it gives them like pride and dignity and self-respect in a way that is often elusive because of the way we've discarded young people who have done wrong. So yes, this is key. There's a lot of things happening in Congress that I'm really excited about, like the Workforce Innovation Authorization Act, WIOA, which came through our Committee on Ed and Labor. It's going to be coming to the floor for a vote. That's going to bring a lot of additional resources into workforce innovation. We're working with the building trades and other organizations to just literally try to get kids, take them off of the corner and out of some tough situations into workforce development, regardless of background. And we've even found programs that start with kids as young as 14 to just put them on the pathway to success. But great question. It's super important. And we've already begun to work with kids. And I've met entrepreneurs who aren't a part of Grayston who are like, Jamaal, just give me a kid and we'll work with them. So we've already started transitioning kids from tough situations into the workplace. Really excited about that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that this is what we're talking about in trying to like retool and rewire our understanding of causality when it comes to crime and what we invest in, right? So instead of having the same knee-jerk reaction every single time that there's a change in levels of violence, where the knee-jerk reaction is we need to put more money into policing or surveillance or facial recognition or any of these things, the next time we see, and when we see this, instead, we need to say, we've underfunded the summer youth employment program. And in fact, when the city, back when the pandemic had just really hit the city very badly, and at the time, the city administration was saying, we're going to cut the summer youth employment program, and we aren't going to fund it at all. There were so many people in our community, particularly in NYCHA and public housing, and a lot of our moms there that stood up and said, this is going to make us less safe, and it's going to cut off a critical pipeline for opportunity and community and skill building for our youth. And there are thousands of young people that are employed and gain skills through the summer youth employment program. So many of our community advocates organized and stood up and said, out of all the things to cut, this really is not it. And there were huge portions that were able to be restored and saved, very thankfully. And these are the kinds of associations that need to be in all of our minds as community. As community members, when we say what needs more funding or what needs more investment or what needs to be expanded in order to make our community safer. And it's summer youth employment. When we see some of these changes in incidents of violence or harm, we need to start thinking, we need to put more in summer youth employment. We need to put more in job training. We need more apprenticeship programs. And as someone, growing up, and a lot of my family was impacted by stop and frisk. I have family members and friends and friends of family that were formerly incarcerated. And the things that they had gotten into our youth, if you had just asked someone, that takes this hard line approach, they would have been locked up for the rest of their lives. But the thing is that when they got out, because some of them were lucky enough and blessed enough to have family that didn't give up on them and friends and community that didn't give up on them, they were able to get plugged back in with a union job, that they were able to work in construction, or they were able to work in the trades. And they've been able, you would never, ever, ever know that this person or some of these folks were ever formerly incarcerated or ever did anything wrong in their youth, ever. And I think that is where we actually stop increases in violence and crime. Because if we never have any sort of pathway for remediation or for rehabilitation or for change in a person's life, it creates a self-perpetuating cycle. And so 100% employment is a huge part of that, and ending the stigma too. And so if you're a small business owner in our community, or if you are in charge of hiring in our community and you're on this call, just think and reconsider. We do have Ban the Box in the city, but reconsider and think about and rethink or challenge the stigmas around you that you may see against hiring people who are trying to get a second chance in their lives. In fact, what we find is that some of these folks are some of the most committed workers that a small business can have, because they really, truly, genuinely don't want to return to that place.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you for those responses. I've just received a minor reminder for the interpreter services. If you both could just speak a little bit slower, my apologies.
Sure thing.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to my next question. This is from Jennifer from Riverdale. And Jennifer asks, I'm a big supporter of defunding NYPD, which ties in closely with the need for community safety. Can you both outline your views on defunding the New York City Police Department, and be as specific as you can in terms of amount, shifting funds to communities, and et cetera?
So I'll go first because Riverdale's in my district. I haven't thought about an amount, but yes, I support the reallocation of resources from NYPD towards more social services. And I think phrasing it that way is important because, as we reimagine and redesign public safety, there is a place for police. I just think we ask them to do way too much. And that's why we see some of the overzealous behaviors and outcomes that are just horrific. So we spoke a little bit about this before, reallocating towards social services, towards mental health supports, so that if there is a mental health crisis, mental health professionals are responding to that crisis. If there is a nonviolent domestic dispute, people who are trained at de-escalation are responding more to that dispute. So those are some of the things I would move funding into. I would also move funding into some of the programs we've already discussed. So workforce development, workforce training, job opportunities, definitely would move resources there, and also into our education system, because our class sizes are too big. We don't have enough teachers. We don't have enough mental health supports there. And we also don't have enough job training programs, particularly in the high school level. And when we shift these funds into these spaces, you'll see a dramatic decrease in crime, both in the short term and in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. And I think, again, one of the reasons why myself or Jamaal may not have a specific number is because of the nature of our work. The city council and the city administration, your city council that we just elected, and our mayoral races, public advocate, our controller who's responsible for a lot of shaping of the city budget, they get into the real nitty gritty on the actual allocation of our city budget and resources. But I agree with Representative Bowman that I do believe that we need to reallocate resources away, and that a big, major causes of this. And by the way, I also think it's important in context, because we hear on the news and media, they perpetuate this idea of crime wave, crime wave, crime wave, right? And so this idea that a lot of us are panicked, thinking that we are at some unprecedented level that we've never seen before. But the context is important. The last time levels were like this were around 2013. And when the levels were like this in 2013, the headlines were that this was a record low, and that who's going to take credit for the very low level of crime. And so the reason we're seeing these headlines about how it's surging and surging and surging is because during the pandemic, everyone was locked inside. And in fact, there were other kinds of reporting that surged during the pandemic, like domestic violence. But because those don't grab the same headlines as other forms of violence, we are seeing these headlines about percentage increases. Now, I want to say that any amount of harm is unacceptable and too much. But I also want to make sure that this hysteria, that this doesn't drive a hysteria, and that we look at these numbers in context so that we can make responsible decisions about what to allocate in that context. Now, that being said, I do agree that we do need to reallocate those resources into the things like mental health supports, and programs like the Stand Up to Violence program. The fact that the NYPD currently has an $11 billion budget, and Jamaal and I are working super hard just to get $400,000 to the Stand Up to Violence program, which is proven to drop reoccurrence of violence by more than 50%, which is more effective than almost any policing strategy that we've seen, really shows how much we're leaving on the table in terms of what we are not investing in to reduce incidents of harm. And so that's kind of, I think, our position on that. The other thing I will say is that while there's a lot of hubbub and resistance, particularly from Republicans, on the idea of defunding and reallocating certain resources, one thing I will tell you is a funny story, which is that before last year's protests in 2019, I was able to get almost the entire Republican Party to successfully vote for a defund amendment in our appropriations. And what I did and what we did was that we did it in response and in the context of the opioid crisis that we've had here in the Bronx. Now, for many of us know that the opioid crisis is not just impacting the Bronx, it's impacting Republican communities, it's impacting Democratic communities. Like, this is an epidemic that knows no politics. And so one of the things that I saw was that the Trump administration and Congress was trying to overfund the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. They were trying to give the DEA even more money than the budget had asked for. And so I submitted an amendment to move millions of dollars out of the DEA and into opioid recovery, relief, and treatment programs. And almost every single Republican voted for that amendment, because when it's in the context of their communities, it's very easy for them to see, oh yes, we shouldn't be treating addiction as a crime. We should be treating it as a public health issue. And what a lot of folks don't understand is that a lot of incidents of crime are the results of issues like PTSD and other sorts of mental health issues that have been precipitated, like Jamaal mentioned, by ACEs, especially in youth. And so the same way that we can draw those, kind of reallocate those resources to reduce harm, we can do the same thing with mental health, with rapid response, and all sorts of other interventions as well.
Excellent. Thank you for those responses, Congresswomen and Congressmen. So I'm going to switch to our last question. And this is noted as, I am from Congressman Bowman's district, Yonkers, zip code 10708. Thank you so much, Congressman Bowman, for doing such a great job. And I can imagine this question can apply to you both. My question relates to the January 6th insurrection. I'm concerned that certain aspects of our electoral process are not secure. More specifically, how will House Republicans who voted against the certification be held accountable?
So that's a great question. At the moment, there has been no accountability. It's something that myself and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and others have pushed for. But unfortunately, our colleagues, both in our party and obviously in the Republican Party, have not moved forward. What is sort of exciting is the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, did announce the formation of a January 6th commission to take a look at exactly what happened on January 6th. We tried to do it legislatively, and unfortunately, Republicans voted it down. I believe in the Senate. It passed the House, didn't it, Alex? But it was voted down in the Senate. But Speaker Pelosi is going to form a commission, which is going to give us a lot more information as to what exactly happened, what did we know, how was information shared, and if any of our colleagues were complicit in what happened on January 6th. But, you know, it's a great question because many of myself and many of my colleagues receive constant threats. So our safety is something that is an issue, and the safety of our democracy is an issue, as we saw with what happened on January 6th. But no accountability yet. We're hoping that it's going to come soon after as the commission begins its work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think that I do believe that the commission is extraordinarily important in order for us to get that accountability, because right now, a lot of what we know is highly speculative, or we think we know what may have happened, or we think we know, or there's speculation around inside involvement. But the purpose of the commission is to, I believe, really and genuinely confirm and double check and cross check those facts. And I think that once we have the commission come forward with whatever it is able to determine, whether that even means, whether it's how well planned in advance this was, facts that the commission can certify around the lack of response. I sit on the oversight committee, and we've started some investigations on this, and there are some facts that we've been able to draw out so far in some of our questioning. But the select committee that is specifically tasked with this, I believe that when they release, the commission is still being convened, but when it is convened, established, and when the investigation is able to corroborate certain facts, I think that we'll be able to move forward with accountability when that happens. And, I think that we just very much genuinely share that concern, because without that accountability, I thank heavens that we had a Democratic majority in the House that day, because frankly, if we didn't, we would have to be relying on a sizable amount of Republican members to do the right thing. And what we've seen in some of their votes is that many of them will fall in line, even when they know it's the wrong thing to do. And so, so this accountability is very important, because it very much, without any accountability, without anything being done again, if, for example, there was a Republican majority in the House, we do not know what would have happened, and in terms of certification of election results. And so it's extraordinarily concerning. But I do believe that the commission, it's not a gesture. It is a serious investigation so that we can finally corroborate some of these facts. And personally, I believe that that's why a lot of Republicans were opposed to the formation of the bipartisan commission, because I think that there are likely members that don't want to see some of these facts come to light and corroborated, even though we yielded almost every bipartisan concession that they had asked for. You know, the commission was made fully bipartisan. There were many other accommodations they requested. It was granted in that spirit of trying to get this to be a bipartisan investigation. And even when they got everything that they requested, you know, I think that they asked for a lot of these things saying, no, we're not going to do it, and shut it down so that they can blame Democrats for trying to, you know, do a partisan commission. Republicans said, we want this, gave it to them. They said, we wanted that, gave it to them. And when they got everything they wanted, we had to call their bluff. And then they said no. And I don't think that there's any other real reason that can be given aside from the fact that some people are hiding from the truth. And we cannot allow that to prevent that investigation from going forward. And hopefully what we see, whatever we find from that, yields and will lend itself to serious steps of accountability if necessary.
Excellent. Thank you both for those responses. So I'm just going to shortly share my screen once again. We would like to thank all the constituents that asked the questions today. Once again, as a reminder, I'd just like to place the contact information for both offices here. You can contact Representative Ocasio-Cortez's office at 718-662-5970. And you can submit questions at ocasio/cortez.house.gov/contact. And for Congressman Bowman's office, you can call us at 718-530-7710, while constituents can submit questions to bowman.house.gov/send an email. Now we're going to move on to the press gaggle. So if you're a reporter and you would like to ask a question, we would ask that you please click the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen and state your name and outlet in the question field. Additionally, reporters who are selected will be unmuted so they can ask their question to the member directly. And we're just going to give it a minute or two for some questions to roll in. So our first question is going to be Mr. Robert Press with the Chronicle.
Thank you, and good evening to Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, who is my Congresswoman, and Congressman Jamaal Bowman. Congratulations on your victory last year. My question is, and it is one that is related to gang violence occurring in the NYCHA houses and in our schools. Is Mayor de Blasio doing enough to prevent the gang violence that is occurring in those places? What do you think he should be doing, and what can be done to stop this gang violence? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I think a lot of the things that we've been discussing have been some of those critical supports that are needed. So, are there things that we can do more of, or that the city and that are just, on a city, state, and federal level that we can be doing more in? The answer is absolutely. And I think that some of these key areas are in adding more funding to the summer youth employment program, these mental health first responses. I also want I do want to make a note, though, on some of the problems in classifying certain activity as gang activity or non-gang activity. And I just want to call attention to the fact that sometimes the bar for what gets classified is very, very low. And so what happens is that leads to a surge in numbers that isn't necessarily supported by what most people would think of as organized gang activity. A lot of times, if there are enough kids hanging out, teenagers hanging out in a corner, that can very easily, instead of being addressed as an individual incident, it gets dressed up almost as a gang activity. And so all of that, again, is to say is that a lot of this is about youth and youth intervention. And so as Congressman Bowman said, this is not about eliminating any or all community patrolling and things like this, but it's about making sure that we are creating the investments of interventions early enough and getting people the assistance and help that they need early enough, so that they're able to be engaged in healthy and productive activity and getting help that they need. A lot of times people, they seek out community when there's a lot of lacking of support, either at home or in their personal lives. And addressing those lack of support or lack of mental health support is a really major way that we can bring down incidents of harm. Jamaal, I don't know if you have anything else that you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to, use the right language here. These are our kids.
Mm-hmm.
These are our communities. These are our schools. This is our city. So it's not about putting it on the mayor to solve that problem. This is all of our problem, which is why Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and myself are having this conversation right now. It's on us to work with the mayor and the governor and the entire city council and other elected officials and everyone in the community who wants to nurture our young people to end the violence in our community. It's on all of us. So, it's important these are our kids, regardless of their background, their struggles, what they've done. If we begin to take care of all of them and see them as ours, you're going to see a dramatic reduction in some of the harm that's being done. So it's not on de Blasio by himself. It's on all of us.
Excellent. Thank you for those responses, Congresswoman and Congressman. So I'm just going to close out and thank everybody for joining. First and foremost, thank you, Congressman and Congresswoman, for joining us today for this spirited and productive discussion. I'd also like to thank our residents for joining us, and as your engagement is what allows us to continue to fight for you guys in Congress. I also want to thank our transcribers, Cara Camacho and Andrew Hansen. Just as a reminder, once more, you can please feel free to contact both of these offices. For Representative Ocasio-Cortez, that will be 718-662-5970. And for Representative Bowman's office, that will be 718-530-7710. And thank you for our interpreters, Aldo Resendez, Diana Perez Ramirez, Edward Lau, Rebecca Chowdhury, and Mega Lama. Thank you and have a good evening, everyone.
Bye, Alex.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.